Why I Am a Member of the Church of Christ. If anyone needs an extra book, I have a couple. Please return them at the end. Sister Pauline, how are you? Good. So we have those books. Here. If someone comes in and needs an extra book, we have some there. Okay. Now, we are on page 174, the chapter of Why I Am a Member of the Church of Christ that we're looking at to conclude today is because the Church of Christ and it has a spiritual teaching of observing the Lord's Supper. So they do it in accordance to what the Bible is saying. This author's argument, this chapter is about that. His point is that they observe it as a death, burial, and resurrection memorial of Jesus Christ. And they do so with baptized believers. And they also do so every first day of the week. They do these things according to scriptural references and examples of how the church in Jerusalem did it, the church in Troas did it, the church in Corinth was instructed to do, and how they were doing it. So that is the breakdown that we see here. Last week we touched on at the conclusion for us as baptized believers, then how are we to partake? And we're to partake with local congregation that we're associated with or visiting with at that time. And we were speaking specifically about individuals who were not interested in coming to church, or let's say you couldn't come to church, or you were prevented for job reason, or some hypothetical scenarios where you couldn't. Can you then gather one or two people together so that two or three in your midst, according to what Jesus said in Matthew, God will be with whenever two or three are gathered, that you can partake? We said no for a couple of reasons. One was that verse in Matthew 18 included women, meaning if there was an issue where I sinned against mom and mom went and grabbed Mary, that's two women, right? And the point was wherever two or three are gathered, God is there. So God is with those two women. So therefore, it doesn't mean that if they were to say, hey, we're not going to go to church today, mom goes pick up Mary, and then the two of them have Lord's Supper themselves. Right. So we understand that that concept from that verse isn't applicable to worship service or what we're doing for worship. It's talking about going towards another brother or sister and bringing a charge or an offense against them, because the way God set it up, in order to bring a spiritual accusation against someone, you need more than just yourself. That played into the Old Testament and the law, and it played into Jesus when the Pharisee says your witness isn't true because you witness of yourself. And Jesus said, first of all, even if I witness of myself is true, but I don't witness of myself because God witnessed for me. Because we know when Jesus was baptized, God said, what? This is my son whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. So that gives us the backdrop there. So we understand from Sunday morning, we need to get to a local congregation and partake of the Lord's Supper in a manner in which is pleasing to God. Then instructions of partaking of the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner for baptized believers is the concept of causing condemnation to himself, The reason why that's important is because when we read that, sometimes we think in 1 Corinthians 11, that's talking about, David, here you go. That's talking about that verse of condemnation. We think, oh, visitors. If visitors take Lord's Supper a wrong way, they cause condemnation. Well, why is that not a concern? Because sin is sin, right? So if you are already a sinner, it doesn't matter if you taking Lord's Supper wrong or you murder somebody, because God will forgive you of all sin when you become a Christian. That's the concept, right? So he's talking to baptized believers, because remember, the instructions was to the church in Corinth, not to the city of Corinth. So he's telling the church, yeah, when you, don't worry about visitors, when you take of the Lord's Supper the wrong way, you're causing condemnation to yourself. Then people said, oh, and he said to the point where some of you are spiritually dead because of that. Not talking to lost people, because lost people are already spiritually dead, right? So that's something that we have to understand in the manner in which what we're looking at. the flow of what's going on. Okay, that brought us to point number 3, which is actually a question. So point 3 and 4 on 174 and 175 are the last 2 questions, right? So this question says, what is the meaning of the cup? 1 Corinthians 11:25. Somebody read that for us. 1 Corinthians 11:25.
1 Corinthians 11:25. In the same manner, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it, remembrance of me." Okay, so someone read for us point number 3. What does that say on the bottom of page 174?
What is the meaning of the cup? 1 Corinthians 11:25. It means something they could drink, for they were told to drink it. Therefore, it refers to the content and not to the container.
Okay, now that the author is making from this, and we'll read. Mom, can you reread 1 Corinthians 11:25 again?
In the same manner, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me."
Okay, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, right? As often as you drink it. So let's go back to the gospel accounts to when this was established. Let's turn to Matthew 26. And someone read for us verses 27, 28, and 29. Matthew 26, 27, 28, and 29.
Thank you all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament. It is shed from the knee for the remission of sins. I will say unto you, I will not drink before of this fruit of the vine, for that day when I drink new with you in my Father's kingdom.
Okay, so he said he took the cup, gave thanks, gave it to them, drink it, all of you, right? This is my blood. And I say, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom, right? Turn to Matthew 14:22. Matthew 14:22. Because now in Matthew 26, we know that while they were eating, so they were already eating, because they were practicing what? What were they observing when Jesus started talking about this? What festival were they already? Passover. So they were already observing something, they were already eating. Because one time I had a brother say, "Oh, we're supposed to take bread first." I said, "Why?" Because it said that, or we're supposed to take the juice first. I said, "Why?" And he said, "Oh, because in Luke." I was like, wait, for Luke. Let's read all 4. Okay, so Matthew said while they were eating, he took the bread and then gave the cup, right? Mark 14:22 says, while they were eating, he took the bread, take this body, right? Verses, somebody read for me 23 through 25. Mark 14:23 through 25. What does that say? Mark 14, verses 23 through 25.
Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. Assuredly, I say to you, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God."
Then he took the cup, he had given thanks, he prayed over it, and he gave it to them, and they all drank, right? Then he said, "This is my blood," right? Referencing what? The cup or the wine? The wine was his blood, right? In verse 25, "I'll no longer drink of that fruit of the vine until that day." Okay, now let's look at Luke 22. Luke 22. Now, let's read from somebody read verses 14 through 18. Luke 22, 14 through 18.
Then he said to them, with fervent desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I will no longer eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then he took the cup and gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes.
Okay, thanks. Now, someone read for us verse 19 and 20.
And he took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance for me. Likewise, he also took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is a new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you.
Okay, so Luke is the backdrop of what they were already doing, which was eating Passover, right? So he told them he had a fervent desire to celebrate this particular Passover with them. Why? What did he know that they didn't know? That he would be doing what? He was going to die, and he was going to turn Passover into what? A remembrance of the Lord's Supper, right? Of his death, burial, and resurrection. So he gave the cup, and it says he gave thanks, and he said what to them in verse 7? Take this and do what? Divide it amongst yourself. Okay. For I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. Okay. But then what did he do? Then he took the bread, gave thanks, broke it, and then he said what we say all the time, my body is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Likewise, he took the cup when what? He took it when in verse 20. After supper, and said, therefore, this is the new covenant. Luke is explaining to us that there was already a meal taking place, which means they were confused on why he was making a big deal about bread and wine. Why? Because they had a lot of food. Remember, if you go back to Exodus, they had specific food that they had to eat. And this guy keeps talking about bread and juice. We got a lot of stuff here. You keep talking about passing this and that, and this is my body and blood. We thinking about Passover because he was making a transition from Passover to something new, right? So we can't say, oh, Luke, they're taking the cup first. He told them divide it amongst themselves, but the process was still going, right? Until he took the bread and then after supper took the cup and said, this new thing, right? This is now separate. We ate all this other food. Now we're talking about a separate thing that's apart from the Passover that we're observing. The other point is, this is why we have to say, hey, refrain from partaking until we pray. Why? Because in each one of these things, Jesus did what? He gave thanks. So we can't pass. And by the time Auntie Michelle say, oh, I'm sitting in the front, so I'm done already. And David say, oh, I'm in the back. Oh, too late. I already finished. I already asked God for my forgiveness of my sins. I examined myself. I'm done. Because we have to do it in the same format that God did it, right? And he said he giving thanks and then we can partake, right? So that's the concept. So when we're waiting, every member is waiting for the brothers to pass. Hopefully you're thinking about the sin in your life, your relationship with God, how you can do better. And then the man gets up and says his prayer, let us eat. Now we're going to eat. Do you say, oh, now since I cracked the top thing of the bread, so too late, I'm going to go to the juice, I'm done. No, wait a second. Let's give thanks for the cup. Let us drink. That's the concept, the flow, that we're doing things in accordance to the way God established them and that we're all partaking in the same manner. Mom and then Beulah.
That's what I was going to say. Actually, that Jesus made a distinction between the Passover meal and the Lord's Supper.
Mm-hmm.
He stopped it. That's like if you said, okay, that's it. This is what we're doing now, but wait a minute, right? And sometimes we establish family traditions, church traditions, or whatever it may be. But Jesus said in the Lord's Supper, Passover, okay, wait a minute. And then he took the time to make sure that it was clear, to make that separation in breaking of the bread before giving, then he gave things first, broke the bread, and then they ate. And then just make sure you don't forget, then he took the cup. He prayed over. That's how important the Lord's Supper was. Mm-hmm. That you don't mix it with something else and say, oh, did I or didn't I? There was a pattern in which it had to be done for a specific reason.
Right. And that's a good point because Corinth, the church in Corinth, messed that pattern up because they were having a meal still, which wasn't the bad part. The bad part was there was no distinction, and the rich people would get to church first and eat all the food, including the bread, drink all the wine, including what was for the Lord's Supper. And the poor people said, "Whoo, I just made it because remember, I got to walk. You got donkey. Oh, too late. We already had our meal. Oh, what about Lord's Supper? We ate that too. It's done." And Paul said, "What? Don't you have homes to eat in, right? Can't you eat later? You that hungry where first person get the tray and they take all the cups out and say," and Pauline said, "Hey, you ate all of the Lord's Supper." "Oh, I was famished. I was so hungry, child. I didn't even eat yesterday. So I had to eat all." So you sat in the front row. So then everyone the next week going to be fighting to sit in the front row because they know what? This person is so hungry, they eat all the Lord's Supper up. Paul was making again that distinction that eating and having a meal is different than Lord's Supper, right? Potluck is not Lord's Supper. We can't say, "Oh, we're going to have potluck, so let's just have Lord's Supper at the park anyway, because we're going to all be there," right? We're not passing rice and peas, macaroni and cheese, and roti along with unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. It don't work that way, right? Those things taste good, but there's a distinction between food and Lord's Supper, right? But in that distinction, the comments that are being made by Jesus is he talking about a cup and a tray, or is he talking about the wine and the bread? He talking about the wine and the bread, right? That's the distinction that the author is pointing out here. Beulah, and then I'll make my comment on that.
The question I want to ask, because I experienced this and it keep worrying me for a long time. Once when I was in New York, we had ladies' day. In those days, it used to be sleepover. And it was in New Jersey, Elizabeth, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And we get snowed out. So was only the church group, the ladies remain the Sunday morning. So they did Lord's Supper. And I say, we can never experience that, you know. They did the Lord's Supper. This woman get up, she spoke and everything, and then they passed the Lord's Supper and everything. So on our way going, one of the members asked me, she said, "Beulah, what happened? You agree with this, or it disturbed you or whatever?" I said, "I'm accustomed to this, you know. The whole congregation there, and you take the Lord's Supper, but for the woman to distribute the Lord's Supper, well, I don't see anything wrong with that." So I just left it alone. Mm-hmm. So now I want to find if it was right or if it was wrong, mm-hmm. because I wasn't comfortable with it.
At the time, right. It's important for us to understand the flow of God's words, right? The women who were praying with Lydia at the water, if you remember in Acts, they were studying and praying, but were they establishing and running a church? No, but everyone says, "Oh, what about Lydia?" What they were praying and studying, right? Like what you were doing with ladies on the Saturday. We asking about Sunday because we're not talking about what she was doing at the water. We want to know what were they doing on Sunday, right? This concept of Sunday was in this same group, this same church at Corinth, because of the way men and women were abusing gifts, because men too, both were abusing the gifts. The Holy Spirit said, "What? Stop." Now, the women, even who have these gifts to prophesy, to heal, to these things, cannot use gifts in church. So they must have been what? Oh, that's sad, because last Sunday we were doing a lot of things, but that was the way, right? And from that point on, once we get to what Paul was telling Timothy, Paul established what? Now the relationship has to go back to Adam and Eve, right? Because there was a time where God said, "Oh, my spirit is going to pour out on your sons and your daughters, and they're going to prophesy," and all that stuff happened, right? But because of the way we as Christians were abusing the gifts, Paul said, now we're going back to the way it was in the beginning, where who was formed first? Adam and then Eve. And who sinned first? Eve and then Adam, right? That was the format, right? So he said, what? Now I command that all women be silent in church. That's where we get the foundation of the structure of our worship service. That's why we're saying, hey, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm just passing a tray. What's the big deal? Or, hey, I'm just leading songs and I would be singing when I'm sitting down anyway. So what's the difference between a woman getting up and leading songs in the front or sitting and singing loud in her pew? We're trying to do things as a church body that mimics the way the first century church did it in the whose doctrine? Apostles' doctrine. Because in Acts chapter 2, it said those new 3,000 people that were saved continued in the breaking of the bread in the apostles' doctrine. They didn't say, hey, thanks for Christ, we're going to go run off and start our own doctrine. Then the church in Troas was doing it the same way as the apostles were doing it. And when Corinth was doing it wrong, Paul said we got to do it the same way Jesus did it the night he was betrayed with his apostles. That's the flow, right? So once we get to scenarios and hypotheticals, the point is, when you're partaking of the Lord's Supper in a way that's not based in this Bible, it's done what? The wrong way, right? It's done out of, because the point would be not even just because it was women. What about the other people that weren't at church that day? Did they have Lord's Supper? Or what did they do?
They had worship in the church building, and we were stuck.
Where you were, right?
So they decided to do the Lord's Supper to have fellowship.
Where you were, right? Yeah.
They asked me, and I told them the truth, and they said, well, we don't see nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Lord's Supper.
Yeah. See, that's why the focus is wrong when we're missing the point of what we're doing. A lot of times scripturally, right? Jesus say, my people perish for lack of wisdom. People do things for a good intent, but the wrong way, right? So that's what we have to understand, that that's the case, right? There was a time where the Israelites were moving the ark and the ark started to fall. And somebody said, oh, hey, whoa, just a reflex, just to catch. What happened though? Hey, it died because I said don't touch. Oh, it's going to fall. But wait, why are you worrying about falling? So that's my ark. I said don't touch, right? They said, oh, good, we can't get there. It's snowing. So we got to take. Like, we come up with scenarios because of where we are looking at things in a snapshot, instead of saying, this is what God said. He didn't say this. Let's stick to this. Because the point would be next week, why would the women have to go? Oh, because that was just snow. Well, maybe I'm one of the women say, you know what? That was real good last week because we were focused. The men are distracting. Plus, a lot of men don't even come to church anyway. Then they're late. Plus, my husband be arguing with me. By the time I get to Lord's Supper, I don't have good Lord's Supper. This is better. Let's just stay like this way. Then what? Other women say, yeah, you're right. My husband be annoying me too on the way to church. If we could just meet on Saturday, then we don't have to see him. We wake up together Sunday. We take Lord's Supper, it'd be better. Because remember last week when we were snowed in, we had good time. Now what? How long would it take for me to convince other women to do that? Not long, because you did it once. Why won't you keep doing? Hey, this is better way. Let's do it this way. And I'll just keep saying, remember Lydia and the women were at the water. We just like the new Lydia. Now the church is divided because of what? One what if, one hypothetical, one scenario. So no matter what, we still have to do things in according to God's will. That's why I mentioned the praying, because some people say, oh, what's the big deal? Well, it doesn't matter when we pray, what we pray. If you say, let us eat, what's the big deal? The big deal is people are waiting because the disciples were waiting. Disciples didn't know what Jesus were doing. They weren't like, hey, I'm thirsty. You talking too long. Give me the fruit of the vine so I can drink something. Hey, I want some of that bread. They were waiting to see what Jesus was doing. So when we pass and serve, the congregation have to wait because they waited. We can't say, hey, I already know 1 Corinthians. So I don't need to. I already know what Pat going to pray for. Jason going to say, I'm done eating. I pray myself. Even you still have to wait. That's the concept, right? So if we have to do things as strict to the letter as waiting for one another, then it also goes into who's partaking the Lord's Supper and when and where we're partaking it. That's why when we looked at the verse in 2 Corinthians about being unequally yoked. What communion does light have with darkness? Remember that communion is an intimate spiritual connection with kindred spirits, right? That's why you're supposed to partake of the bread with baptized believers, because there's no way light and dark can have communion together, right? There's no way that sinner and saved sinner can break bread and remember Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection together, to the point where Jesus said, the person who dips his hand in this basket with me is going to betray me. Judas, oh, it was me. What did he say? Go do. Did Judas stay? No. Because what communion does light have with dark? Judas got to go. Not because he want to go or he was going to do something, right? That was part of it physically. But Judas had to leave the meal spiritually because of why? He was not part of them anymore. They didn't know that, but Jesus knew that, right? And that darkness was causing what to the group? What were people doing when Jesus said that? Hey, who are you talking about? Ooh, hey, it's me. Now, are we doing Passover? Are we doing Lord's Supper? No, we too busy wondering, hey, what Jesus talk about now? Same thing with spiritual things, right? Once darkness come in the room with light, now we so busy worrying about, man, who just walked in the room? It changes the dynamic of what we were actually remembering, right? You go to a funeral and you crying and you sad, right? Then the person's third wife come in, she only 19 years old, and everybody do what? Stop crying. All of a sudden they not sad no more, because now they're upset that this person trying to have a memorial service with us because they did not accept her, right? Suddenly everyone stopped crying. They could be bawling that last tear, go back in their eye and be like, hey, what's she doing here? Because you can't mourn anymore, right? You too upset with who just walked in. It has to be that way with spiritual things. We have to do things to that magnitude where we would know, hey, something changed. This is not the same memorial service anymore. Why? Because we're not with the body and we're not doing things according to God's word. Therefore, it no longer has the same effect. And we have to get into thinking our minds into that concept. Okay, someone had a hand or no? Okay, the other thing I wanted to say was this concept of the cup, right? Because some people will say, oh, because Jesus said he took the cup and not the cups. Therefore, if you have to take for one cup. So if you go to a church, you all want to drink out of the same cup. Okay, you do whatever you want to do, but you can't then say, no, it's not about us drinking out of one cup. We saying that you supposed to drink out of one cup. Now, this is where churches are very funny. They don't want to say you're sinning. Like a church very rarely will say, hey, you as a congregation is sinning. They'll say you're supposed to do something. So I don't speak that, right? So if I go home and I'm doing something and Erica said, you're supposed to do the dishes, I'm going to say, so what? Am I going to get in trouble? If she say, oh, I don't know, or no, okay, I'm not going to do dishes. Keep playing my game. I'm only going to do something if I'm going to get in trouble for doing. So supposed to is not good enough for me. Maybe for you. I need to know, will I die and go to hell for that? Then you saying, ooh, see, because it's easy to say, hey, you supposed to do this. Women supposed to only wear certain colors. Women only supposed to wear this height length skirt. Oh, supposed to or die and go to hell? Oh, I don't want to say hell, but I mean, it would be nice if you just drink out of one cup like everybody else. See what I'm saying? Like there's a distinction, because Paul told them not, it would be nice if you guys waited for each other and had a better Lord's Supper. He said, when you do Lord's Supper wrong, you bring condemnation to yourself. They said, whoa, time out. We're not trying to do that. So what we got to do? Hey, you got to eat it this way and drink it this way. Okay, sorry. Tell God sorry. We do it the right way. That's what Paul said. So for us, we have to look at things when people bring us something is it right? Is it wrong? It's not about do you feel some way about it, right? Because I could say, oh, hey, instead of fruit of the vine, I like apple juice. And a lot of people think that the fruit that Adam and Eve ate was apple anyway, so kind of symbolic. So let's use apple juice instead. It's not about how you're not supposed to ask when you get home. Hey, how did you feel about that? When Brother Ellis said, let's use apple juice. In church, don't be upset by this. No one is concerned about feelings here. Because if I did things based on how I feel, I do a lot of things different. Me, I'm not a morning person. I could stay up all night, never sleep. But once I go to sleep, I want to sleep. So if it was how I feel, I say, hey, we should have church nighttime. So if you was to say, hey, they were talking about getting rid of Sunday morning, Ellis, how you feel about that? I'd be like, wow, well, how I feel is great. But it's what am I going to do? It's not about how we feel, right? It's about what are we committing to do with our thoughts, our minds, and our action. So this concept of this cup, that's why I read all three accounts. And Auntie Michelle started mouthing it with Luke when he said he gave that cup to them and he told them divide it amongst themselves, right? So that had to mean something. So I don't know if that meant they just poured out in their hand and they're waiting as it's dripping on the table and waiting, or did they take like communal style food is a master cup and a master plate of food and pour that out and distribute it. Now, people who are from other countries, depending on where your culture is, that's extremely common. If you have ever went to a Chinese takeout restaurant and you've seen the family eating, so sometimes I'll go to a Chinese restaurant. There's one that's by our house and it's family owned. The mother, the father, the kids being there doing their homework. Sometimes when I go pick up food, I catch them in the middle of their eating. Chinese people by and large eat communal, meaning they bring out a thing of rice. They mother not gonna be sitting out here putting rice on plate, this. She bring out a pot of rice and a pot of the food and the water, and you distribute amongst yourself. Because I did all the cooking. I'm not about out here start slaving, divide up plates like this is a buffet. You do yourself. That's their structure of eating, right? So if I went and said, hey, one cup and one plate, they would say, yeah. And then I said, oh, but all of you should be eating out of the same plate. They're going to be like, why? And drinking out of the same cup because mom put that. Yeah, but we have our own utensils, our own plate, our own cup. We just going to take and distribute amongst ourselves. That's the concept, because remember, this was still pulling from a what? A meal. And if you go back to what they were doing in Deuteronomy, how were they eating? What was the dynamics of their food, right? Because they were eating, remember, they had to dress a certain way. They had to be ready, as if somebody said, let's go right now. That's how they were being prepared. This was coming forth from that. So if the cup was so important, why did he keep going on mentioning the fruit of the vine in his blood? That's why I asked, is it about the actual cup and plate or the wine and the bread? Right? That's what we need to understand. Is it about the four walls, the carpet, and the ceiling, or about the individual church people that make up the church? Is it about the songbook in your lap or the words that you're singing with your heart? See, that's where we have to get, because some people will say, hey, I'm going to take it so literal that now if you don't drink out of one cup, then you're sinning, because the Bible said he took the cup, gave thanks, gave it to them, and that was it. So that's why this question is in here, because it says, what is the meaning of the cup? Maybe to us, we say, hey, well, I mean, a cup is a cup. I got a lot in my cupboard. But there's some people, remember, these last set of questions are for people that have already agreed with the chapter. They already agree with how to do Lord's Supper. Now they're getting to specifics of weekly practicing of Lord's Supper. Mom?
I would, instead of going to Matthew, I would go to Luke, where it specifically says that Jesus gave the cup to them and they divided it among themselves. So to just stick with just Matthew 26 and walk away with the notion that it was only one cup and they all drank out of one cup, then why not go to Luke? Why not go to Luke and take where it says they took the then he took the cup and gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among yourself. Why not take that route? Like if your argument, like one is just as good as the other, right? Mm-hmm. So why go to Matthew 26 when you can go to Luke 22? Because what they'll say for Luke is, and it's in error because Auntie Michelle mouthed this too, right? So what they'll say to Luke is, oh, the first cup was not the Lord's Supper part, because then they ate and then they drink. That's why I said when they divided amongst themselves, that first mention in 17 and 18, did they drink yet? Right? The point was not drinking yet, right? It wasn't until 20 it says he also took the cup, right? Now he have his same cup, right? That still have wine in it. And then he said, this is the cup of the new covenant. And then they proceeded, right? So that's the concept
that's there. But right, you can't only look at one gospel account in a vacuum, because I said that was like that brother that told me, oh, we're supposed to take the cup first. And I said, why? And he said, Luke, they did cup first, then they did bread. Then I said, but then they did, if I follow your logic, they did cup again. So should we do 2 cups? He said, no. But I was like, but just confusing to me if you picked the first cup, but not the second cup. My point was, that was your argument, not mine. I didn't say that, but you said that, but you forgot about the second cup, right? You were thinking, oh, this is this cup, because you didn't understand that they divided that amongst themselves. And then he established the Lord's Supper with the eating in the cup after, with the bread in the cup after they had eaten. But again, he was only using that one gospel account, which is why he said that should be the way to do it. Go ahead.
I mean, Jesus says here before that he's talking about the kingdom. So even, having that one cup, giving it to them, dividing it up, and then, proceeding in because at that point when he gives a cup to them to divide up, he says, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until I'm in the kingdom, until the kingdom comes. And then he goes on, and then he takes the bread, and he gave thanks, and then it goes on to specifically talk about the fruit of the vine. So to me, I would just, instead of hanging my hat on just Matthew, I would read the account and say, you know what? I mean, 1 cup. First, well, even for sanitary reasons, but Jesus had to give them something. And so if I'm going to take the approach of it's just Matthew, then I would just say, well, why not Luke? And I would understand their remarks after that, but I would still bring Luke into it.
Right. Now, the other thing is, we got to think, this is what I always say, that Christianity was for who? Who was Christianity for when God was establishing these things in real time? Was he thinking about only Jews? Was he thinking about only United States? Everyone. So let's say God must have said this got to work for everyone, whether it's just a couple people or the church Ellis went to in Atlanta that had 3 services with 1,000 people each. Now explain to me, how am I going to get 1 cup to everyone? Because 1,000 people there. So many people, if you come late to church, you got to stand up. So how will we get? Explain to me, what cup will that be? Because this lady is 80 years old. Even if I got a barrel, what's she going to do? Put straw in? Then I'm going to say, oh, Bible didn't say nothing about straw. How will we distribute? Oh, I wasn't thinking. Yeah, because I'm just thinking about what? My church. That was the whole point of the last lesson. They were talking about, oh, this is how my church do it. But it's not about your church, because God said he want all men to be saved. So how can we get what your church to every church? It has to be something that's in business we call scalable, meaning when you come up with an idea, we can't be so excited about our idea. It works for 1 person. Then I say, okay, let's sell to 1 million. You say we can't. Why? Because we spend all our energy making 1. But we got to sell, we got to scale, got to be able to take that same concept and scale it to 1 million. 1 cup don't scale, because once you get to a church that's huge, how can we partake? And that's where you have to always remember, everything with your New Testament was going to be about everyone, not only about us or only about Jews, right? We're too busy thinking about us only and not looking at how will other people still do things in spirit and in truth if we bring them to binding like these sort of things. And that's where I like with these verses. Yes.
I think it's similar to the way we take Lord's Supper today, because when we first initiated the cup that had the bread along with it, there were folks that questioned that, because they went back and said, well, Jesus took bread and broke it. So they were so accustomed to the tradition of the men taking the plate up front with unleavened bread or cracker, actually breaking it and then passing it out. So when we migrated to the cup that had the bread already in it and the juice, there were questions about it. Well, Jesus didn't break the bread, so we're not doing the same thing. Should the bread be broken by someone else? Then I go back to what was the importance and the importance of it, and the emphasis was on the bread not the break. I mean, everybody needed to know that this was the bread, and this bread represented the body of Jesus Christ. And so it was a conversation in this congregation as well.
But the thing about that was here too, the server wasn't breaking the bread. The bread is already in the tray. So even in that argument, the server wasn't breaking anything because the bread was already distributed in the tray sitting on the table with the passers. The server was here. The server just took his piece. So even if that was the case, the server didn't break the bread. The server is just serving, right? So with that bread, let's get into that. But I want to say something about the fruit of the vine. This is wine here. This is not Welch's. So Welch's grape is a new invention. They did not have Welch's grape in Jesus' day. So people be telling me, oh, they didn't have. But Welch's is a company, though. And do you know how Welch's grape started? You know why? Welch's grape started around the time where people in this country was saying it's bad to drink alcohol. And Welch's said, hey, this is money opportunity because these people don't want to drink wine anymore, but they got to take communion. So I just make grape juice before it's fermented. And guess what happened? He became millionaire. So now in 2014, you're trying to tell me that something that's not even 300 years old was in Jesus's day. But Jesus did not have Welch's. He knew Welch's would exist, right? But he did not have Welch's. Just like people say, oh, Jesus didn't turn water to wine. He turned water into better grape juice. Well, you have Welch's, this brand, that. What is really the difference in grape juice? But wine ages, and there's a variety of a wine that someone just made today, and drinking a wine from 50 years ago, it tastes better, right? Start talking about putting new wine in old wine skins, the acidity would burst it. Well, what if I took old Welch's and new Welch's? Who cares? It's not going to burst. But the problem is some people say, oh, this isn't wine. Well, if you go into the Middle East, into this culture, Italy, France, this is where Spain church started, right? And you tell them, hey, you guys doing Welch's or are you doing wine? Guess what they're going to tell you? What's Welch's? We're doing wine because we've been doing wine since 1,000 years. Even kids drink. That's to remember, this was still being established in a culture, not in United States culture. There is no such thing as United States this night in which Jesus was betrayed. The men did not have on suit and tie. Women didn't have braids and perms and high heels. That's American way. We not talking about that. We be thinking about us, but church had to work for everyone. Every culture. That was God's point. Every culture. He told Peter, don't keep telling me what's unclean. I'm tired of hearing that. Go there and see that there is no distinction now. It has to work for everyone. He thinking Peter. No, we're not thinking Peter because soon it's going to be Africa. You don't know nothing about Africa. You too busy thinking about Peter. And if I let you do things so dogmatic as Peter, when Africa come along, they're going to say we can't do it that way. Why? Because nothing around us allow us to do it that way. See? So we have to get to some level of what? Normacy. Okay, let's read point number 4. And then we'll close. Point number 4. What does that say on page 175?
Is the bread turned into the Lord's actual blood, and the fruit of the vine his actual blood. That's from 1 Corinthians 11:24. The Catholics say so. It is the doctrine of consubstantiation and transubstantiation. They contend that the change is made today when it is blessed by the priest. Jesus took bread and said, "This is my body." Jesus was living in the flesh, his earthly body. So if the bread became his literal body, he had 2 literal bodies at the same time. Jesus also said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood," but the cup did not become his literal blood, for such was still flowing in his veins. Jesus can mean nothing but the literal or actual body and blood. Why insert the qualifying word literal or actual? The fact that they insert these words is proof that it could be symbolic instead of literal or actual. Why not assume that the cup is literal new covenant? Why argue that the cup is the actual blood but not the actual new covenant? Both are the same passage. The cup is the new covenant. Christ also said, "I'm the vine, ye are the branches." Why not argue that Jesus was a literal vine and the disciples were literal branches?
Okay, now this is important because this is very true that the Catholics is Eucharist. They don't call like we call communion, and their point is that this thing transforms into Jesus's actual body and blood. Right now, why is that important? Here's church history for you. Right, there was a time post John. Right, so John was the last living apostle. And when we say church persecution, sometimes we think all together, but church persecution was divided. In Jesus's day, in the apostles' day, persecution was from who? The Jews. The Jews looked at them as an illegal division of Judaism. But after some time where Jesus said the temple going to be done away with, what happened? The Jews got pretty much annihilated in terms of their culture, and Rome took more control. In that time, you had persecution from the Romans, and the people had a charge against the Christians. They said, oh, they're practicing cannibalism because they're saying they're reading something about my body and my blood. So they're eating skin and drinking blood. They say, oh, wait, that's disgusting. We don't do here. We don't do that way. Christians said, no, we're not doing that way. We're saying, no, yes, we said, and it went forth. So then Catholicism point was, let's get back to the way it was being done the right way before the persecution, where we have to let the group know that this bread really transformed into Jesus's body. Well, how? Because if you ever been to a Catholic mass, it goes like this. First of all, does everyone get the juice at Catholic mass? No. Only the priest. Well, how, can I have some? Not for you. Oh, okay. What about the bread? You got to come up and the priest place it into your mouth, right? So right there, I'm already confused because why can't I have any juice? Well, the priest only. We already have a division. But why or how is this transforming into Jesus's physical body? Because his point was, if you rebuttal and say, oh, yeah, well, the same. How do we know it's literally the new covenant? He goes a step further and said, Jesus said, I am the vine and you are the branches. So why don't we call ourselves tree people? Well, what you mean? Well, because say you're the branches, Jesus is the vine. So if we're going to take it literal to that, how come we're not tree people? See the point he's making? Like the distinction was not about a transformation on this table where magic happens. And as soon as the closing prayer, that somehow that unleavened bread turns into flesh and the juice turns into blood. No, we're talking about what? Symbolic things as references, right? The other point to close with, some people will say, oh, well, then if they were really using wine, should we use wine? I feel you can use wine, but also grape is still fruit of the vine, right? It's still in the same context. But to me, I understand our culture, but if you go to Paris, kids drink wine. So I don't know what to tell you. You go to Italian family in Sicily, they don't have soda there. I don't know. Maybe you thought Coca-Cola. We got two things here in this house, water or wine that our grandfather stepped on some grapes. What you want to drink? That's all they have. And we not partaking with water. So we have wine, right? So this concept of today's class should be focused on a globalization of the church that God had in mind from the beginning, and really looking at how we do things as baptized believers. What's the importance and the significance of those things? Okay, good. Thanks for everyone's comments. It was a good lesson. Please, if we could transition ourselves to worship, we'll have Brother Aaron lead us in a quick word of prayer.
Father, my God, we give you thanks for this time that you allow us to come to study the portion of your holy divine truth. We ask, Father, that what we do is have peace in your sight in accordance with your word. We ask, Father, that you will be with us as we move from this part to worship you, third worship in spirit and in truth. Ask, Father, that you will be in the midst of us, that our worship will be acceptable, and that all things will be done decent and